Joyce, based on what you've seen and heard coming out of the courtroom, what are your expectations? I'm not even going to say predictions, but do you get a sense of where the verdict could go? Conviction, total exoneration, hung jury. I mean, is there a lean?
So, Alex, I've tried, I'm not sure how many, north of 50 cases. And usually prosecutors convict because you have a lot of ability to control whether or not you indict a case. You've got a big load of work on your plate. You don't indict the cases where the evidence isn't good. But every once in a while, something goes wrong in trial. That didn't happen here. The evidence all came in, I think, as well as the prosecution could have asked. Every once in a while, you encounter a juror who just has a bad feeling about your case or a bad feeling about prosecutions in general. And that's not predictable either. But the evidence here was very strong. As Mark points out, there is the possibility that some jurors might find Michael Cohen to be less than credible. I would expect that the prosecution will argue that you don't have to believe everything that Michael Cohen says in order to convict. But I think that one is a tough sell, and that by and large, the jury will have to believe Michael Cohen when he says Donald Trump was telling him what to do, was aware of what he was doing, was involved at every step in order to reach a verdict of guilt. And so that will be, if there's a sticking point for jurors. Again, it won't be that the conduct happened. We've seen the checks. We know that Stormy Daniels received a payment. The issue is whether or not Donald Trump was involved in a criminal way.
Okay. So the aftermath, Mark. Take us through the political implications to the American psyche as we look at the what-if scenarios here. What if he's convicted? I mean, in some corners, will there be dancing in the streets? If he's acquitted, can the American psyche stand a retrial? Is there a Trump trial volatility index for the American psyche we should be watching depending on the outcome?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has tried exactly 0 cases in his life, I can say definitively that everything you just said kind of in its own way gave me its own special headache. I think what we've seen, the dynamic we've seen over and over again is that people are very firmly entrenched in their corners here. Now, having said that, I mean, I don't think there will be celebrations or dancing in the street or anything like that. I think in some ways, despite the focus we put on it, it's a pretty peripheral issue for the vast majority of people in this country. I will say that if Trump is convicted, it will give his opponents, specifically the Biden campaign, language to use that could potentially be very damning. Language like convicted felon Donald Trump. I mean, that's the kind of thing White House has been discussing, or the Biden reelect has been discussing, as far as, do you use language like that to try to sort of hang whatever happens in this case around his neck? The other issue is, I mean, there is polling that says that a fairly significant proportion of voters, would actually have a new kind of judgment or a new kind of set of facts on Trump if he were convicted of one of the things he has been indicted for. So that could be an X factor here. Ultimately, though, I mean, we've been predicting, often wrongly, usually wrongly, about how things are going to play Trump, spectacle over the years. So I guess we'll just have to wait and see, which is always a right.
They don't call him Teflon Don for nothing. But let me do the flip side here with you, Mark, because the Wall Street Journal today says an acquittal could give Trump new political momentum. It is possible a hung jury would too. Does Trump have the ability to spin either a conviction or an acquittal into a win this summer?
Maybe. I mean, he certainly is going to try. I mean, look, the Mueller report was extremely long and quite damning if you read it closely. The fact is, no one read it closely, or very few people read it closely. And he was able to spin that into complete and absolute exoneration, or whatever words he used.
Well, Bill
exactly.
Barr helped.
So, yeah, exactly. Well, look, that's what he will try to do. If there's not a definitive guilty verdict here, he will, I am almost certain, try to spin this as, see, everyone is corrupt. They're not, the jury of, the American jury is not letting Crooked Joe get away with this, or, you can imagine what he's going to say. So, yes, he will try to spin this as far forward as possible.
So the papers, Joyce, when Trump is back in court Tuesday, might we see him waving these stacks of papers he's done at more than a dozen prior appearances? I mean, do you know what that's about?
It's almost as though Donald Trump needs a prop when he's walking in and out of the courtroom. I mean, no criminal defendant is comfortable or at their ease when they're on trial for their liberty. And it gives the impression that someone on Trump's team said, let's put this big sheaf of papers into his hand. He can look down at them and refer to them. It'll give him something to talk about other than the fact that he's on trial for charges of having committed criminal felony crimes. And it will perhaps make his transition in and out of the building easier.
Do you, Mark, as I ask you to assess this paper stack waving around, could there be a political motive? I mean, is it all about manufacturing an image around documents or evidence like, look, I've got the documents, I've got the evidence in my hand, too?
Yeah, I mean, it's always about manufacturing an image with Donald Trump to some degree. I mean, I think it's also worth stating that a lot of these papers that he has at the ready are because he actually travels, or his team travels, with someone whose specific job it is to print out positive news coverage that he can read, at various points throughout the day that can bolster his mood, that he can feel better about himself for. So, look, the whole thing is again, it's entrenched in the Trump mythology that we've seen played over and over again in various ways over the years.
And Mark, we have seen the video of the near constant drone of boos for Trump at the Libertarian Convention yesterday in D.C. as he was begging for their support. He even promised to appoint libertarians to his cabinet if he wins in November. He may be the first leader of a political party to address another party's convention, and he appeared uncomfortable doing it. Why is he floating this Netanyahu-style coalition? Is he seeing troubling numbers?
Oh, I think, well, first of all, I think he might be the last major candidate to address a convention like this in the future. I also think it probably bodes poorly for whoever's decision this was, because I can't imagine he was terribly happy about it. Look, he's trying to piece together a coalition that is extremely fragmented. I mean, I think that's true of both parties at this point. And you never know where you're going to find the definitive, maybe 1%, 1.5%, whatever, that could tip you over the finish line. And what I think a lot of us think is going to be a very, very close election. Yeah. So, yeah, it was a spectacle. It was a bad look, I think, and probably bad for his mood. But I think that's probably behind whatever thinking there was.
Okay.